The Spin-off Podcast Network.
Are you making the most of your KiwiSaver investment? Generate is an award-winning KiwiSaver provider with a track record of strong long-term performance. Making a smart decision now could add tens of thousands of dollars by the time you reach retirement. Book a no-obligation chat with a Generate KiwiSaver advisor today at generatekiwisaver.co.nz/get-advice. A copy of the product disclosure statement is available at generatekiwisaver.co.nz. The issuer of the scheme is Generate Investment Management Limited, and of course, past performance does not guarantee future returns.
I'm Toby Manhire, and this is Juggernaut, the story of the Fourth Labour Government, a podcast in 6 parts.
Doesn't give my opponents much time to run up to an election, does it?
This nation is at risk.
What do you think you're up to now, you perverted little liar?
I could smell the uranium on it as you lean towards it.
There's a radical overhaul in the history of New Zealand's administration.
Juggernaut, the story of the Fourth Labour Government, made with the support of New Zealand On Air. Listen now on the Spin-off or wherever you get your podcasts.
I've got to go see my parents sometime after the 25th in Feb. So my main concern is not picking up the cron somewhere between my lounge and my parents' sitting room and giving it to my fucking ailing dad and killing him accidentally, because they need time to fucking build up my inheritance.
Yeah, totally.
They've really fucking sat on the last 70 years. and they're running out of runway to fucking
that
provide
totally
me with
sense.
they really need to be in the market, till it lifts a bit.
I respect that.
Tēnā koutou katoa, my name is Toby Manhire. This is Gone by Lunchtime. Kia ora Annabelle Mather.
Kia ora.
Kia ora Ben Thomas.
Morena.
Kia ora Te Ahi Butler.
Morena.
Welcome especially to all of our new listeners on the Parliament lawn, listening to Trevor Mallard's iPod blasting out through the speakers. Really great to be here. We're a political podcast from the Spin-off. And how does it work, Annabelle?
I don't know, but I heard that Barry Manilow is actually what's on Trevor's iPod. Like, he didn't specifically select those tracks, like those are his jams.
Yeah, he just pulled it out from the drawer, plugged it in.
I reckon he's definitely got an iPod.
Yeah.
For working out.
iPod Classic?
Yeah.
What about an iPod Mini?
Or like a shuffle.
Mini disc player? So he's got a mini disc player?
What was that? That was John Key's famous line that, the Helen Clark government was an iPod government and a Walkman government in an iPod world.
Oh, that's a good line.
Oh, sick burn.
Yeah. Wow. But now...
technology tanga.
Now the iPod 2 has been claimed underneath the waves of history.
It's been a time. It's been absolute scenes. We're talking on Wednesday, aren't we? Wednesday, the 16th of February, and it's day 9 of the protest in the grounds of Parliament, the occupation in the grounds of Parliament and surrounding streets that has kind of paralysed that part of Wellington. It began with a convoy, which itself was inspired by a Canadian trucker convoy, which left from both ends of the country and gathered in Wellington, some in Picton. There's still a camp in Picton because they couldn't get across on the ferry because that required vaccination or tests.
I was going to say, isn't there always a camp in Picton, though? Because, the inter-island ferry is never working, so there's, a permanent campground there.
Before the convoy took off, maybe it was 2 weeks ago, I was driving through Ponsonby and I saw, this bedraggled sort of K Road looking kind of dude. Yeah, well, I thought K Road. I thought, like a classic sort of late 2000s sort of hipster dude with his Von Dutch trucker cap and dirty denims and with a sign saying support the Canadian truckers. And I hadn't been following the news and I was like, I do. They do good work. They're
good people.
Yeah.
Very polite.
honest, hard-working, probably much reduced methamphetamine use since new regulations came into force. But now it turns out he probably was just a gross fetid redneck and I don't think I do support the Canadian truckers.
So this group have...
I regret honking.
Which seems to move between 300 car hardcore who are there and up to 3,000 who will attend the day. It's got quite big, and there are a bunch of different organisations involved in it, which has become, at moments, a bit tense. There's been some internecine battles going on in terms of the control and who negotiates and what the demands are. I won't bore you with that in detail. I've written about it a little bit on the spin-off, but you've got the Freedom and Rights Coalition group, which is set up by Brian Tamaki and Destiny Church, who weren't involved in it at the beginning, but supplied PA gear when that wasn't there at Parliament, and a little bit of kind of ad hoc security, internal security, and then what we'll call the counter-spin crew, who are much more kind of into the QAnon conspiracy imported from America type theme, are angry with them because they feel as though they have encouraged people to leave and that they've got in the way of their camera work. And most recently they're cross because there was a suggestion from a chap called Hicker from the Freedom Rights Coalition that they might want to move their cars a little bit to allow some emergency services through, which has infuriated the counterspin team. And so there's quite a lot of struggle as the police attempt to find someone to negotiate with. I believe they're talking to Leighton Baker a bit lately, former leader of the New Democracy Party. Is he still? He's not anymore. New Conservative. Yeah. New Conservative Party, beg your pardon. But one of the things, Ben, Annabelle, is that there's been a lot of debate about who people are. And I've been watching far too many live streams over the last 7 or 8 days, and I feel like I've got a reasonable sense of them. And it's I think it's nonsense to suggest that it's teeming with Nazis or even extremists, and it's also nonsense to suggest that these are just, it's just WOMAD, that it's just a lovely carnival with sort of, hemp craft for sale. I've got a couple of audio clips, Tia, here, which I think are reasonably representative. Probably sit somewhere in between the most kind of casual onlooker versus the more extreme end.
The hospital system is filled up with the vaccinated people that are actually very ill. People are actually dying from the booster shot. Now, if you want that booster shot, that's your death wish, because this media is not going to tell the truth about all of this, what's happening. They're incapable, because their orders are gag orders. And but around the country at the moment, people are dying from that booster shot. There's lots of people coming out saying, this has happened just before, a few days ago, a couple of days ago, just a few hours ago. If you want that booster shot, that's your death wish. That's the corporation death wish.
If it's an inconvenience for the city, well, guess what? Mandates are inconvenient to our families. Many people have lost their jobs because they choose not to be a lab rat, to be used by an experimental drug that has got nanotechnology, and nanotechnology is a chip. It's programmed. I deal with nanotechnology. I have dealt with algorithms. I have dealt with AI, and what the whole three are is that they control the technology, the program that they are going to put us in, and that's why they want 5G in.
Now, I don't think that those two people are necessarily the same as all the people at the protest, and nor do I think that they could fairly be described necessarily as extremists, but they have swallowed some appalling misinformation, disinformation, and much of that sentiment, I reckon, is common among those groups, and it's dangerous, and it stems from more than just being anti-mandate, though I accept there are some people there who just think the mandates are wrong. It stems from disinformation, anti-science rhetoric. What do you reckon, Annabelle? What are you seeing when you look at that gathering?
Well, when I listen to that, I agree that within that group of people, that those ideas expressed by those two people aren't extreme, but in reality they are actually really extreme. And I don't know, it's like, I think that there's some valid concerns around mandates that should be discussed. and I think it's reasonable for people to expect a date or a plan for when they might be lifted. But when people kind of mix into this big soup of bizarre beliefs, it really takes away the credibility from those valid concerns.
Yeah, it's interesting to think about basically a hierarchy of public sympathy in terms of the attendees at the march, or the occupation as it is now. There has been a tendency to sort of flatten out the attendances when people are commenting. You know, Bryce Edwards, noted academic and political commentator, has been out there doing some shoe leather journalism and has concluded that this is the seeds of a working class uprising, possibly to a socialist utopia. On RNZ, he sort of sparred with Morgan Godfrey, the very good commentator, who sort of said, you know, they're not legitimate protesters, they're all Nazis. And of course, you know, the truth is always, well, not so much somewhere in between, but kind of
I think you're probably
fractured like a spectrum.
Slightly caricaturing both of their arguments, but let's go with it.
So, you know, at one end you've got, you know, very sympathetic sort of characters. There was I think a nurse or a midwife interviewed by Henry Cook on Stuff who had a really bad reaction to the first vaccination, has had immunological problems, and her doctor advised her not to get the second shot. I've talked to other people in that situation, and the vaccine mandate scheme doesn't provide exemptions. They provide a very, very, very narrow range of exemptions. I think, you know, early on, I think Ashley Bloomfield was saying publicly there might only be about 100 people in countrywide who would qualify for a medical exemption. Yes. Now, there's actually a much larger number of people, you know, not in terms of the population as a whole, but in terms of bigger than 100, who, you know, who have seem to have genuinely founded, you know, backed up by their doctors' advice, and we've heard from chronic fatigue sufferers, people with microencephalitis, and you know, I think there is, you know, I think we can all feel sympathy for those people. Then further down, you've got perhaps the sort of people that we were hearing, you know, the First Lady that we heard from in the audio clip, who you would characterise as a victim herself. You know, she doesn't seem like a Nazi. She's obviously bored and gone down the rabbit hole, and now is living in this kind of terrifying world where people are trying to control her with nanotechnology and poisonous vaccines.
Scroll up and you'd see 1080 along with all
when
that 5G
stuff. When I look at that group of
Absolutely.
people, it's, you know, like I look at some of the signs and the people involved, like, you know, Liz Gunn and John Ansell standing in front of that sign that was comparing Jacinda Ardern to
the Christchurch
terrorist. Yeah. And to me, it's like those people represent the ultimate in white privilege. Like, when you can claim the trauma and the horror visited upon the Muslim community of Christchurch that day and use it to compare yourselves as victims. To me, that's truly revolting and a demonstration of, like, the grotesqueness of white privilege. And then, you know, that guy that was the first interview, like, obviously a guy who's gone down the rabbit hole and all of that stuff. But, you know, I mean, in my mind, the real conspiracy is, or not conspiracy, but all of these poor countries that have no access to vaccines, and then richer countries that do, that's the real COVID vaccine story, that actually the poor are missing out. And
that's why there should be thousands of people at Parliament, you reckon?
And then when you look at the Māori that are involved in that protest, you know, a lot of their stuff comes from, like, the absolute suspicion and fear that they have of the state, the mistrust, and for very good reason. But what they all have in common is that they've all been subjected to misinformation for so long. And so, you know, in a lot of ways, not the John Ansells and the Liz Gunns, but they're all kind of victims of misinformation. And that's something that in a post-COVID environment, we really need to look at, you know, how we deal with these platforms like Facebook and Twitter and all of that stuff, YouTube.
Yeah, and you know, and this goes back to, you know, there's a full spectrum of sort of levels of empathy and sympathy. You know, at the one end you've got, people who have genuine health concerns who have been basically overlooked by a very rushed vax mandate process. It's like if we actually think back, this was all done in about a week or so leading up to the traffic light system. And it's easy to sort of forget in the rush of things that happened in the emergence of Omicron. This was an extremely rushed and imperfect project, and there will obviously be gaps. I'm not sure what's been done to backfill those. Then, you've got the victims of misinformation starting to get more unsympathetic. You've got the people who start using it as, a kind of reason to talk about, hurting politicians.
Yeah.
And then at the far end, you've got people like John Ansell, who is just a professional race beta conspiracy theorist, and the wellness influencers and hippies.
And Action Zealandia and grifters and all sorts, right?
That's right. And these counterspin people who, their business model is racking up vulnerable people, showing them on TV being TV, quote unquote, as revolutionaries. And, I think that's one reason a lot of the dialogue is just flattened into are the protests good, are the protests bad? And that's not a particularly useful way of looking at it. I mean, I think in terms of the sort of climate of political violence around the world, and, we've seen indications that, there's risks in New Zealand as well, starting from, James Shaw being sort of accosted on the street a couple of years ago. You have to take these things seriously. And it does sort of boggle my mind, for instance, that the police are just treating it a bit like a music festival with pass outs to, even the big day out or whatever didn't let you could just go in and out freely. They'd check you for liquor or something, right?
Well, you couldn't bring patio heaters in, for example, or sort of giant dance floor sized gazebos.
Yeah. And I mean, if you're, in their laundry distribution hubs set up at the backbencher, I would think that you would be just wanting to check that there's no knives, no guns.
Not to keep bringing up that example, but when you look at like what they did at Putiki Bay at the start of lockdown, going in and closing up that camp, and then the response to this,
I want to come back to the police response and the speaker response in a second, but there's just one other thing to say about this kind of panoply of different causes and representatives. The only other thing that I would say is you will hear people, if you listen long enough or read enough, talking about being sovereign citizens. And it sounds a bit odd, and these are sort of ideas that a police officer can't arrest you if they're not wearing a hat, and these sort of 3 sentences you can read out to a police officer about your own sovereignty and it's this kind of esoteric, elaborate kind of made up field of kind of pseudo legalistic language. And the only thing I would say about that is it's important to understand that the end point of that is overthrowing the government. And you'll hear the Nuremberg Code mentioned or on signs. It's like, what's that? That's weird. Well, what that is that that's about putting politicians, journalists, scientists, and other people who have promoted the use of the vaccine on trial and potentially executing them. Many just want to go straight to the execution. That's what it is. So it sort of sounds, it's not, and I guess what I'm saying is it's a continuum. It's not that far from 5G, nanotechnology to that stuff. It's actually a pretty small step.
That's why I find it so ironic too. Like a number of journalists this week have come out and said, how these are really kind of reasonable New Zealanders with valid concerns and all of that sort of stuff, and people should just get amongst it and understand, get to know them better and all of that. And ironically, a lot of these journalists that are saying that are the same people who lose their shit every Waitangi Day when someone chucks a dildo at a politician. I mean, I totally support people's rights to protest as well, but it seems to be like some newfound moral code for a large section of New Zealand media that all of a sudden they're like, the right to protest, except on Waitangi Day or at Ihumātao.
Well, yeah, I mean, Ihumātao got a good run. They were there for quite a long time.
But
they did, but they weren't threatening the public. They weren't talking about executing politicians. They weren't have white supremacists camping among them.
And when they flew the He Whakaputanga flag,
they were
for the most part, it was not associated with the sovereign citizen movement.
Yeah.
This has gone by lunchtime on the Spin-Off Podcast Network. We will be back in a jiffy.
Are you curious about how business can be better? I'm Simon Pound, and I host Business is Boring, a podcast where I kōrero with some of the most interesting people in entrepreneurship, commerce, and making things happen. Tune in to Business is Boring every Tuesday, brought to you by the Spin-Off Podcast Network in partnership with Spark Business Lab.
This is climate adaptation.
We are the pōtiki of the taiao.
In the words of those keeping the home fires burning.
It's more than just going along and planting some trees. You got to be able to defend that place to the end of your life.
We have the solutions. We just need to come back to the belief in ourselves as rangatira.
Join me, Nadine Hura, and Ruia Āpirehama, the Kōpapa Korangi Series 2, Ahi Ka. Brought to you by Te Komato o Te Tonga, the Deep South Challenge, out now on the Spin-Off Podcast Network or wherever you get your podcasts.
Do you find it hard staying optimistic with all the financial news in the media? I'm Bernard Hickey, and on my podcast, When the Facts Change, I'm here to help you navigate the ever-changing landscape of economics in Aotearoa. So join the conversation every Friday on When the Facts Change, brought to you by the Spin-Off Podcast Network in partnership with KiwiBet.
Okay, let's keep tracking.
Let's keep moving. We've got to keep tracking. The police response and the Speaker's response. Let's talk about that a bit. On the police response, they originally stood on the steps. I think perhaps they weren't expecting quite the turnout, and clearly they weren't expecting the tents to start rolling in. Then on Thursday, I think, of last week, they attempted this kind of sort of almost a kettling effort, but they basically were trying, they pushed a line up after having 3 arrests when that dude from New Plymouth attempted to serve arrest papers to Andrew Little. Then they pushed down and they were basically trying to, I think, isolate the group into a corner of the grounds, and then I think they probably would have let them, the idea is it would have fizzled out and they would have just had a small holding there and everyone could go back about their business. That didn't work, and so the next day they kind of decamped back to the steps of Parliament, the forecourt, and then suddenly the gazebos started coming in, the sound equipment, honestly, I saw one image with a stack of patio heaters. It's just, and you were mentioning it, Ben, that it seemed extremely strange that there wasn't any effort at least to just put people on the gates and say, look, you can come and go, but you can't bring basically kind of, this is the most effective housing project achieved in New Zealand for years. And then we had the Speaker, for reasons that kind of confound me, and I don't know whether there was some genius strategy behind it, an attempt to ridicule or an attempt to channel energies. But he played Barry Manilow, he played public health messages. Yesterday he was playing the debates from inside the chamber. And what was happening there, Annabelle? Was he just being a cantankerous, irascible, get off my lawn old geezer?
I mean, I feel like it's very on brand for Trevor Mallard. Like I mean, as Morgan said, he basically was trolling the protesters.
Yeah. And is that a good idea or a bad idea?
You know what? By comparison to other countries, is it that big? Is it like a horrific thing that he was playing Barry Manilow? I don't think so. Yeah, it is a bit humorous. Is it going to fix it? Well, apparently not. But, is it the end of the world? Is it a heinous breach of human rights? No. Does it fuel their sense that they're not being taken seriously and therefore they will continue to stay put? Yeah. So probably counterproductive overall. Yeah,
Ben, a sideshow, but also it did seem to galvanise them a bit. And, they were talking about psyops. Psychological torture that was being wrought upon them.
This is an FBI and CIA tactic. Is when the Waco siege was happening in the 1990s, the FBI and alcohol, tobacco and firearms agents blasted through massive Marshall stacks, Barry Manilow and other, what we would call terrible music. at the Waco compound all night, and it's a way of like basically sleep depriving, the targets, driving them a bit insane. The difference here tactically, of course, is that Trevor Mallard did not have the protesters surrounded. In fact, it was quite the opposite. And he wasn't playing it all through the night because presumably that would disturb, the 50 MPs or whatever that live across the road and other Wellington residents. And it just seemed a bit it seemed very New Zealand in the sense that it's just not serious. And, whether it galvanized, I don't know that it galvanized the crowd in terms of making them furious or angry. I think that it kind of, whether his intention was sort of lower the tone or lower the tensions, make it a bit more haha, or whether it was to, troll them, as some people have said.
Or whether it was to get
at least there's not pepper spraying them.
Yeah, and the biggest priority of all, to get mentioned on Stephen Colbert.
Well, this is right, and then I think he certainly seemed to lean into that on the second day, asking Twitter for song recommendations, and what it did do is it shows that you're engaging with them, and then of course they're blasting back their songs, and now we're having a bit of a dance off basically. I mean, they might as well do Step Up to the Streets on the lawn with Trevor Mallard can bust out his crumping moves from when he was education minister in 2007.
I do wonder if it would have been more effective to play Mandy than Copacabana, though.
Yeah, that's important. That's interesting.
Yeah.
But the thing is, you've got to remember, protesters love this.
He should have sort of said that it was AstraZeneca that was coming out.
Yeah.
But you've got to remember, people who are doing occupations love this. The festival is actually almost the point, because why do you think people get involved in conspiracy theories online? It's because they're lonely, they're disconnected.
Create a sense of community.
Yeah. And these are not for the most part, these are not the people who would go to a music festival for 2 shots for summer that Jacinda Ardern promised, and so they're having their own. And then the speakers joining in, and they get to feel like they're resisting the man and trying to overthrow the government without having to put anything on the line. A lot of people have said, if you move the police in, that'll really radicalise them. You'll create a whole generation of terrorists or whatever. You generally don't. With most protests, most people don't like getting arrested. They don't like their overseas travel being curtailed. They don't like having to go to court. They don't like getting their cars towed. And, most people will actually just decide it's not worth it. But here, you're giving, Trevor Mallard gave them an entry point for engagement and struggle that, they could not just participate in, but was fun, and they got to dance. So, of course, it's going to prolong the whole thing. It's sort of ridiculous, and it just
But know what? In some ways, like as you say that, Ben, it kind of makes me think that's actually not a bad thing. Yes, it prolongs the protest, but, these are guys that think that the government and the state is absolutely evil and out to kill everyone, and that the most heinous people on earth. So the fact that there is a bit of lightness and humour and engagement, I think, in the overall scheme of things, may not necessarily be such a bad thing. I mean, if they'd opened up with pepper spray and police batons and stuff, that kind of does feed the narrative.
Salt and pepper, not pepper spray.
Controversial take, but I actually think that some very controlled and well thought out and well considered and strategic engagement with these people is not the worst thing in the world. This is a group of New Zealanders, teeny tiny slice of New Zealanders, who feel, for whatever reason, no matter how real or not real the reason is, they feel marginalised and terrified and scared and like they're not being listened to. And so I don't think that further alienating them is going to be very helpful in the overall scheme of things. And actually, because we're not getting rid of YouTube and Facebook and all of that stuff anytime soon, they're probably only going to grow. So actually, while I totally understand why politicians feel fearful and don't want to be walking around the campground, passing out cocktails to them, I do think that there needs to be some thought about getting a rōpū of leaders together, not necessarily political leaders, but people with mana who can engage with some of the more reasonable factions within this rōpū and start to have a conversation and a negotiation to bring this to an end.
The police have indeed asked for leaders to be provided they want to talk to people. And one of the problems is, and we touched on this at the outset, that it's very hard to identify people who are able to speak on behalf, because when Freedom and Rights Coalition, Destiny Church-backed spokespeople appear on the steps on the PA and say, hey, everybody, maybe we should just think about letting emergency vehicles through, they're castigated as demons by other parts. So it's difficult, right? But Leighton Bates has been talking to police. I hear what you're saying. I mean, like maybe they should set up a kind of a tent for talks and get ask the chief science advisor to come and give a talk. I mean, it's tricky, right? But maybe we
you can't legitimise this sort of thing.
They're already being legitimised by all of the media coverage around them and legitimising them. I mean, that doesn't help either.
I'm kidding about the tent, but Ben, surely if engagement needs to happen on some level. No.
If you're the Prime Minister and you start making appointments with people based on how much they break the law, it's pretty obvious what's going to happen. I didn't say the
Prime Minister, though. I said some sort of.
So you don't even think the police should even be talking to Leighton Baker or leaders at the moment to try and negotiate something about moving the cars?
They should be talking about logistics, but I don't think it's a wise tactical decision to offer them free parking for the duration of their time. First of all, because these are like the leaders that we're talking about are conspiracy theorists. They will think that the police are trying to steal their cars. And if the police had any sense, they would be.
They don't just think that. They think that the Sky Stadium was being set up as a way to try and inject people with Omicron.
Oh, okay. No, I had only gotten as far as they wanted to clear the roads for the tanks to roll down. And you can't, it's the same as when Hone's nephews jostled John Key and his entourage at Waitangi Day. And I think they might have gotten diversion or something. And they offered they sought out to do a restorative justice session with John Key. But you can't have that. You can't say, well, it's very difficult to get an appointment with the Prime Minister, but if you try and attack his party, you'll get one. And it's the same here. I mean, there's a lot of groups that could get 1,000 people onto the parliamentary lawns. And you certainly don't want to encourage people to take more extreme actions to block up traffic. Engagement is totally the wrong thing.
I get what you're saying, Ben, but do we not want to pull these people back into the team of 5 million, for want of a better word? Like people can come back out of the rabbit hole. Some people are able to come back out of the rabbit hole when they've got the right support and resources around them. And I'm not saying that we're going to be able to fix everyone that's here, but we actually do have to try. These are I mean, like them or hate them, whatever, we share a country with them. Like, do we not want to try and diffuse the situation rather than push them out to one side where they're able to just keep incubating these freaky ideas and it becomes worse and worse and worse and worse?
Well, I think part of the thing there is, in terms of going down the rabbit hole, what we would be doing here, if you met with the leaders of this protest, is you would be inviting the rabbits in. And, if you've seen the demands that some of the protest leaders have made, they are end all laws end all public health regulations relating to COVID-19. Now, these aren't realistic or genuine demands. You can't. There's nothing to negotiate, and legitimating these people is the worst thing that could possibly be done in terms of their ability to grow their own movement. We've talked here before about how the opposition leader will always try to share a podium with the Prime Minister if they're given the chance. Well, of course, rabid nutcases are going to want the same thing.
It's an extremely difficult and febrile and delicate situation. I suppose
I just
the
wonder
argument
what
is not speaking to those people who you describe as the crazies or the ringleaders, but the people who are most of us have a friend or a family member or someone who has been tempted into that stuff. And I guess what we can probably agree on is that the approach taken should be to, as far as possible, minimise those people getting sucked into that gravity.
Absolutely. Yeah, totally agree.
Also, when you mention rabbit holes, it does put that idea of those trenches they dug into a new perspective, doesn't it?
I do wonder, like if the police go in there with batons swinging, like, are we just going to get another wave of people coming in who see that and it really, ignites something within them?
I think the police have been really restrained and I've been on the whole impressed with the way that they've dealt with this. But look,
I feel terrible for the people that live around there too. I listened to that interview with the kuia on RNZ yesterday who lives across the road and students getting harassed. It just sucks, man. It sucks for them. So, yeah, I think anything that we can do to get it closed down in a peaceful way so those people that live around Parliament and the people who work in Parliament can get back to a bit of normality and peace is a good thing.
Hey, listen, Phil Goff is going to leave politics. Let's just talk about that very briefly. That leaves he's been in New Zealand politics since, I think, almost the beginning of the world. It was at 81 or something.
Early 1900s.
He was a minister in the 4th Labour government, the 5th Labour government.
Wow. So in October, he will finish his second term as Auckland mayor, and he ain't going for it again, which leaves a vacancy for the Labour endorsement on the left. Richard Hills had been hotly tipped by the Herald. Maybe that was a kite flying exercise by somebody who can say he's out of it, which leaves Efeso Collins as the, I suppose, almost presumptive.
There wasn't so much a kite flying exercise as a Zeppelin that he flew in across the spin-off about a month ago.
Well, yeah, we had a good chat. How do you see it, Annabelle? On the other side, there's Leo Malloy, the I think what do we say? Colourful, flamboyant, outspoken, garrulous,
social media pugilist.
It was weird listening to Bob Harvey talk Leo Malloy up on RNZ the other day. Yeah,
Bob Harvey. Bob Harvey. That was one of his more interesting interviews. He was talking about how Chloe Swarbrick or Paula Bennett would be his choice.
Well, yeah. Well,
and I thought, that's one vision.
There is
one coherent vision for Auckland.
There have been all sorts of people who'd been mentioned: Paula Bennett, Mark Mitchell, David Shearer.
Who was talking about Mark Mitchell?
Mark Mitchell was in the
cover for a long time. Was Mark Mitchell talking about Mark Mitchell?
Well, it's not too late.
I am so sick of hearing all this chat about Mark Mitchell.
And meanwhile, Viv Beck, who's pretty widely liked head of Heart of the City, is still considering it. Sounds like that may be announced in a minute. By the way, Leo Malloy's campaign manager, Matt McCartan.
Yes, the game changer himself.
How about that? I mean, if you think that Leo Malloy doesn't have experience, well, that's probably the most seasoned campaigner in the game. So
I mean, Matt McCartan has lost more Auckland mayoralties as a candidate and campaign manager than almost anyone else in history.
That's certainly another way of looking at it. Annabelle, your thoughts on the Auckland mayoralty race?
Well, I totally agree with what Morgan Godfrey said the other day. Like in the biggest Polynesian city in the world, it's time that we had a Māori or a Pacifica mayor. But the way the mayoralty works, I don't think that's probably ever going to happen because you need so much money to be able to, run an effective mayoralty campaign that kind of excludes a lot of Māori and Pacifica from throwing their head in the ring, or at least having a real chance of winning. So,
well, it looks like Efeso Collins will have is likely in the pole position to get the Labour endorsement, and with that comes a big machine and quite a lot of money. No,
to be honest, I'd be surprised if Labour gave it to. I think Efeso would be wonderful, and he's a smart guy with with all the chops, charismatic, mean speaker, great relationships builder, tūturu South Aucklander, but I kind of feel like Efeso is too Labour for Labour.
Well, he's got another potentially insurmountable problem, which is that Ben Thomas endorsed him within a few hours of him announcing.
Ben?
Well, I went to university, not sort of with the fessa. I didn't know him, but he was a very impressive figure. He has been his whole career. Even as a kid knocking around university, you're like, this is a leader, right? And that's really what Auckland needs, in the sense that its biggest issues are sort of trying to get funding or regulation from central government that can, help the city out of the sort of various messes that it's in.
I love his free public transport policy. I think that's frickin' awesome.
Yeah, probably zero chance it could ever get over the line. But at the same time, you need somebody who actually is, Len Brown and Phil Goff both said, both as Super City Mayor candidates said, I'm going to take the interests of Auckland to Wellington. And, they both gave it a bit of a shot.
They gave it a little nudge, eh?
Yeah, but Fessa is the sort of person, he really is an inspirational leader, and he's the sort of person who can use the levers that you actually need, like the media, like public opinion, to kind of, make that sort of progress. I mean, obviously an insurmountable challenge in Leo Malloy, but the thing is with Labour, really interesting, because one of the things that Fess mentioned in his interview with you, Toby, was nobody knows where these Labour endorsements come from. For first Len Brown and Phil Goff, which is actually incredible, since I can't see apart from in the event of a schism, I can't see the non-Labour endorsed candidate ever winning in Auckland, in the super city, because you need, even though voter turnout's lower in South and West Auckland, you still need those constituencies where the traditional, the Auckland right, and you see it will say Viv Beck, if is she running? Is she actually
we don't know yet. Yeah. She's still considered.
But she's heart of the city, right? Like, that's literally just a few blocks of CBD.
That's why it would be so cool too if Anana, if Vessel Collins does get the ticket, because it's that whole thing. If you can see it, you can be it. I reckon if he does, we'll get a way better turnout in South Auckland and all of that stuff. But I hope and I pray and wish that I am absolutely wrong, but I just think Labour will be very reluctant to give him the ticket.
I don't know.
And that would be a mistake, in my opinion.
If it's not him, then there's going to be someone who comes out of left field, unless David Shearer actually has changed his mind and is going for it, because the expressions of interest that they've invited close tomorrow. And then, so if you don't put your name in the tin for the Labour endorsement by tomorrow, Ben, then you're not going to get it. And so far, we're not aware of anybody else who wants it. And then there's some discussion among the Auckland teams, and then it goes to the New Zealand Council, which is the governing body of the Labour Party.
Based on all of this,
do you reckon Mark Mitchell will apply for the Labour ticket?
Could be. That would be something.
An anonymous nomination.
You heard it here first.
We've had a member of the public who doesn't wish to be named who has heard good things about Mark Mitchell.
His name is Mitchell Marks. There's also some interesting stuff happening in Wellington, where Tori Whanau, who was the Chief of Staff to the Green Party, has thrown her name in the ring, put her hat in the ring, put her name in there. She's going for it.
Portai in the ring.
And we're still waiting to hear whether Andy Foster is going to go again for it, although given he's contested every election for the last 300 years, then it's likely. And we don't know about Paul Eagle. So there's more to discuss there.
I think we know about Paul Eagle, don't we? Fleur Fitzsimmons, the Wellington Council. No,
he's out.
Fleur Fitzsimmons, who's the Wellington councillor, has resigned and has said that she will not stand again for council, and she has long been seen as Eagle's successor in the Rongotai seat.
So is he in or out?
In or out?
I think he's in. But secretly in.
Okay.
He's not publicly in.
Secretly in.
I love a secretly in. Yeah.
We will talk more about Wellington and Christchurch and other parts of the country in the weeks to come. We'll see you in the Gone by Lunchtime tent at Parliament in a week or two. Kia ora Annabelle, kia ora Ben, kia ora te ai. Thank you very much to spin-off members who keep the lights on. Love you.
Kia ora, I'm Alex Casey, Senior Writer at The Spin-Off. We wouldn't exist without the ongoing support of our generous members. If you're able to, you can make a donation at thespinoff.co.nz/donate.
Kia ora e te iwi, Te Aihe Butler here, podcast manager at The Spinoff. If you enjoy listening to our podcasts, consider supporting our mahi by signing up to become a Spinoff member at thespinoff.co.nz/donate. The Spinoff Podcast Network.